Hello and welcome to my next video in the Story Snippets series. In my previous videos I was talking about what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was talking about wanting to be a nurse and then wanting to be a scientist, and in this video and possibly the next one, talk about how I wanted to be a physiotherapist. And that came about because I did some work experience in Year 10 in 1985 with a physiotherapist. And I loved it. It was sciencey, but it was like practical sciencey. And so it was it wasn't measuring things out into test tubes. It was, thinking about how things worked and how things could be fixed, and mainly the human body. And I'd always been pretty interested in sort of medical stuff anyway. So loved it, absolutely loved it. And then I got to do some more work experience a couple of years later when I finished Year 12. But so I decided I wanted to be a physio. So I structured the next 2 years of school to prepare for that. I took all sorts of, physics and chemistry and English and maths at the highest levels, and so I could get a good university score, which I did. I got a pretty good score. And so then in my final year, 1987, my final year of high school, I started going around and contacting the physio schools. And they took one look at me and saw, blind person, and threw up their hands in horror and said, "Oh my gosh, no, we couldn't possibly have you in our school. You're blind. How could we possibly train you? Our classes, we've got lectures of 150 students. Everything is graphical, overhead based. How could we possibly train you? No, it's simply out of the question." The schools in Sydney and Melbourne both said that, and I didn't even bother trying any of the others. And it seems quite bizarre to think back, 30 years, because you could do that sort of thing back then. Places could say, "No, we're not going to train you," because the Commonwealth and state disability discrimination legislation hadn't come into being. If I went to a physio school now, they would have to accommodate me. So it seems quite bizarre thinking back to how that was. But there's a happy ending to this story, because I knew a person who was a physiotherapist, and she was losing her sight at the time, and she'd retired. And she knew of a person who had been studying at the North London School of Physiotherapy, which was a special school to train blind physios from all over the world. So I enrolled in that school. And because their English academic year starts in September, as opposed to the Australian academic year starting in February, I had 6 months to kill, or 8 months to kill. So I did a fair bit of voluntary work, and I also had the absolute joy of working with a physio, just being an assistant. Well, not just, they're very important. Working with a physio, being a physio's assistant, setting up equipment and, folding and washing linen and stuff like that. But it was very, very valuable, and I got some really, really good experience, and I will be forever grateful to her. And the reason she took me on was because it was her son that had been studying at the North London School of Physiotherapy, and because he was vision impaired, and he's a very successful physiotherapist now. Shout out to Roy Daniels if you're watching. And yeah, so got to do that, and I will tell you a little bit more about my experience in the North London School in the next video. And I've got to work out how to stop it now.